One night, when he was just 8.5 years old, Nathaniel Gillis stood in his new bedroom, a room his father had let him into just hours earlier. The new house, with its creaky wooden floors and weathered walls, seemed to promise a fresh start for his family. But as darkness enveloped the space, putrid stench like that of a decomposing body filled the room. And then, in the faint light spilling from the hallway, Nathaniel saw a pale girl with long black hair, wearing a flowing white linen dress, standing silently in the corner. She didn't speak, but her cold, empty eyes locked onto his, making the heart of an 8-year-old boy feel like it had stopped beating. Nathaniel had no idea that this moment would change his life forever, drawing him into a world where ghosts, demons, and nameless entities manipulate the human mind. But what's even more chilling is that Nathaniel wasn't alone. Thousands of people from small-town America to remote villages in the Middle East have felt the presence of these entities, and not all of them live to tell the tale. This isn't your typical horror story one you can close the book on and forget. This is a story of real experiences, of fears that span centuries, and of questions that remain unanswered. Are these entities demons, ghosts, or an intelligence far beyond our comprehension, wearing masks to deceive us? Today we're diving into the world of Nathaniel Gillis and Vicky Joy, two individuals who've spent their lives confronting these shadows. But before we unravel what they've uncovered, we need to understand what brought them here and why their story might make you see the darkness in your own bedroom in a whole new light. Nathaniel Gillis, now a self-proclaimed religious demonologist and researcher of the supernatural, was once an ordinary 8-year-old boy living with his parents in a small American town, a place you might imagine with quiet streets, old wooden houses, and nights so dark they swallow the stars. We don't know exactly where this town was, but picture a community where ghost stories are whispered around campfires, where belief in demons and spirits lingers in Sunday sermons. When Nathaniel's family moved into their new home, they were chasing a better life. But the room assigned to Nathaniel, with its bare walls and dim light, became the stage for a nightmare that would last 8 years. From that first night, when the pale girl appeared, Nathaniel felt a presence that wouldn't let him go. It wasn't just in his bedroom. It went to bed with him, woke up with him, and even followed him to school like an invisible shadow that never faded. Imagine being a child carrying a backpack to class, but always sensing unseen eyes watching your every move, a cold presence trailing your steps. The pale girl Nathaniel saw wasn't a childish hallucination. She wore a white linen dress styled like something from the early 20th century, with long black hair obscuring part of her face. But what terrified Nathaniel wasn't just her appearance. It was the stench that came with her, a smell he described as a rotting corpse, something an 8-year-old couldn't possibly have known. At that age, Nathaniel lacked the words to describe what he felt, but he knew this entity wasn't human. It radiated a malevolence he could feel in his bones. And as he settled into the house, the entity changed. From a pale girl, it morphed into shadowy figures lurking in the corners, sometimes just a dark blur moving across the wall. On some nights, Nathaniel saw a swirling cloud of smoke coiling in the corner as if it were crouching to watch him. He described this transformation as a learning curve the entity seemed to evolve, with his awareness growing more terrifying as he began to understand it. But the worst part wasn't what he saw, it was what he dreamed. In recurring nightmares, Nathaniel saw a man sitting at a picnic table outdoors. The man with a blurry face but piercing eyes did two things that left Nathaniel waking in a cold sweat. First, he injected something into his arm. Nathaniel, at 8, didn't even know what insulin was, so how could he dream of a syringe? Then the other man at the table, locking eyes with Nathaniel, put something in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed, and Nathaniel woke up only to find the entity in his room still there, as if it had orchestrated the nightmare to feed on his fear. Nathaniel believed this entity wasn't just threatening him, it was harvesting his fear, as if his terror was the sustenance it needed to thrive. While Nathaniel battled his own shadows elsewhere, Vicky Joy was facing nightmares of her own. Vicky, now a researcher and counselor for those experiencing supernatural phenomena, has lived with sleep paralysis for 40 years. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, unable to move with a crushing weight on your chest, and seeing a dark figure, or worse, an entity with massive black eyes, standing by your bed. Vicky described feeling like her soul was being pulled into an abyss, with voices whispering in her head that she'd be dragged to hell. These weren't ordinary nightmares. Some victims, including Vicky, woke up with ligature marks on their wrists and ankles, as if they'd been bound in their dreams. Vicky wasn't alone. She received dozens, even hundreds of calls from people across America. Children, adults, the elderly, all describing the same phenomenon. Shadow figures, men in hats, alien-like entities, and a bone-deep terror that their souls were in jeopardy. Vicky once said, "The people going through this aren't crazy. They're intelligent, healthy individuals looking for answers." But answers were hard to come by, especially when churches and doctors often dismissed them, calling their experiences hallucinations or insanity. The cultural context of America, where Nathaniel and Vicky grew up, is fertile ground for stories like these. In the US, especially in small towns or religious communities, belief in demons, ghosts, and the supernatural remains strong. Shows like Coast to Coast AM, where Nathaniel and Vicky shared their stories, have become a platform for those who feel abandoned by society. But alongside this belief is a deep divide. Science dismisses the supernatural as delusions or neurological disorders, while churches often only accept cases that fit their template of demonic possession. Nathaniel, trained by the Pentecostal movement, was rejected when his experiences didn't align with their views. Vicky, when she mentioned incubus and succubus in a Bible study class at university, was met with blank stares and ridicule from her professor and peers. This conflict between science and faith, between personal experience and communal belief, creates a tense atmosphere where people like Nathaniel and Vicky feel trapped between two worlds. The biggest question this story raises is, what are these entities that Nathaniel and Vicky have faced? Nathaniel believes they might be a singular intelligence wearing different masks, demons, ghosts, even aliens, to hide their true nature. Vicky, with her 40 years of research, suggests they could be linked to the pineal gland known as the window of the soul, but she doesn't rule out a supernatural element. There are a few initial theories we can consider. First, these could be traditional demons as described by the Catholic Church, fallen angels seeking to possess humans. But if so, why do they leave physical marks like ligature wounds? Second, they could be Dybbuk's mutated human spirits from Jewish tradition trying to re-enter living bodies. Yet this doesn't explain the appearance of alien-like entities. Third, they might be aliens in disguise using technology to manipulate human minds. But why would they appear in dreams from the 16th century? And finally, the boldest theory, a singular intelligence, neither demon nor alien, manipulating humanity across centuries, using every mask possible to conceal the truth. I can't help but think that if this last theory is true, we're facing something far bigger than we can imagine, a force that knows exactly how to exploit our deepest fears. To understand why Nathaniel and Vicky have dedicated their lives to confronting these entities, we need to go back to the terrifying moments that changed them forever, those nights when the darkness wasn't just darkness, but a doorway to a world no one wants to enter. After the fateful moment when Nathaniel Gillis, an 8-year-old boy, faced the pale girl in his new bedroom, his life was pulled into a whirlwind of supernatural phenomena that defied explanation. The stench of decay, the cold gaze of the girl, and the constant feeling of being watched were only the beginning. Meanwhile, Vicky Joy, in another place, was battling her own nightmares, nights when she woke up unable to move with a shadowy figure standing silently by her bed. These experiences weren't fleeting nightmares. They left marks both on the mind and body, and led Nathaniel and Vicky to cases far more horrifying, from a murder driven by possession to a woman carrying 2 heartbeats in her body. In this part, we'll dive deep into the terrifying encounters they faced, the eerie clues they uncovered, and the questions that made them wonder about the true nature of the world we live in. Let's start with Nathaniel when he was just 8 and a half, standing in his new bedroom on a night when the darkness seemed thicker than usual. The house his family had moved into wasn't anything special. An old wooden structure, likely in a small American town, where quiet streets were broken only by the rustle of wind through the trees. But Nathaniel's room, with its bare walls and faint light from the hallway, became the stage for a phenomenon beyond a child's imagination. That first night, as he tried to settle into the new space, a foul stench flooded the room. It wasn't like garbage or spoiled food. Nathaniel described it as the smell of a decomposing corpse, something an 8-year-old couldn't possibly know. And then in the corner of the room, the girl appeared. She was pale as paper, with long black hair partially covering her face, wearing a white linen dress that fluttered as if sewn in the early 20th century. She didn't speak or move, but her eyes, cold, empty, and malevolent, made Nathaniel feel like his heart was being crushed. He didn't scream or run. He just stood there, frozen by fear, as the entity seemed to drain every ounce of hope from the room. This phenomenon didn't end after that first night. For 8 years, from ages 8 to 16, the entity became an inseparable part of Nathaniel's life. It didn't just stay in the bedroom. Nathaniel said something that chills the listener to the bone. The entity went to bed with me. It woke up and went to school with me. Imagine that feeling, a child walking to school with a backpack, but always sensing an invisible presence trailing every step, a cold shadow that never left. The entity wasn't fixed in one form. From the pale girl, it evolved into shadowy figures lurking in the corners, sometimes just a dark blur moving across the wall. On some nights, Nathaniel saw a swirling cloud of smoke coiling in the corner, as if it were crouching to watch him. He described this change as a learning curve. The entity seemed to adapt to his awareness, becoming more terrifying each day. But the most horrifying part wasn't what he saw, it was what he dreamed. In recurring nightmares, Nathaniel saw a man sitting at a picnic table outdoors. The man, with a blurry face but piercing eyes, did 2 things that left Nathaniel waking in a cold sweat. First, he injected something into his arm. Nathaniel, at 8, didn't know what insulin was, so how could he dream of a needle? Then the other man at the table, locking eyes with Nathaniel, put something in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out, and Nathaniel woke up, but only to find the entity in his room still there, as if it had staged the nightmare to feed on his fear. Nathaniel believed this entity wasn't just threatening him, it was harvesting his fear, as if his terror was the energy it needed to exist. But Nathaniel's story doesn't stop at personal experiences. As an adult, he became a demonologist, confronting cases that would make even the bravest shudder. One of the most terrifying cases occurred when Nathaniel was called to a house where a horrific murder had just taken place. The house, with its torn-up carpet and an atmosphere so heavy it felt suffocating, was the scene of a crime committed by a teenage girl. But this girl wasn't acting alone. When Nathaniel arrived, the family recounted how the girl with a blank face had spoken in a deep male voice that echoed from her mouth without her lips moving. That voice didn't belong to her. It belonged to something controlling her body. Nathaniel, accustomed to supernatural phenomena, still felt a chill run down his spine witnessing this. The torn carpet, perhaps a remnant of a violent act or ritual, became an eerie clue. It didn't explain why the girl acted this way, but it suggested the house was hiding a darker secret than the family could imagine. Another case, even stranger, involved a woman known as the widow of Demona. Nathaniel didn't share many details about where this occurred, but picture a small village, perhaps in the Middle East, with dusty red roads leading to ancient stone houses where belief in supernatural entities is part of daily life. This woman, a devout Jew, began experiencing bizarre symptoms a heaviness in her body, as if something were living inside her. When exorcists examined her, they discovered something unbelievable. She had 2 heartbeats in one body. One was hers, but the other, faint and irregular, belonged to something else. Exorcists believed she was possessed by a dybbuk, a Jewish spirit seeking to inhabit a living body. But what made this case even more chilling was the theory that she wasn't just possessed. She was pregnant with something not human. When the exorcism was performed, the entity left her body. And the strangest thing happened. The fetus, if it ever existed, vanished. No blood, no trace. Just a woman left, exhausted, and a question without an answer. What had been living inside her? And where did it go? While Nathaniel faced cases like these, Vicky Joy was battling a different but equally terrifying phenomenon: sleep paralysis. Vicky, with 40 years of experiencing this condition, described it as a living nightmare where you're trapped between sleep and reality. Imagine lying in bed, the faint glow of a nightlight casting shadows on the ceiling, and suddenly you can't move. A weight presses down on your chest as if someone is sitting on you. And then in the darkness, you see them shadow figures, men in hats, or sometimes entities with massive black eyes, like aliens from sci-fi stories. Vicky felt voices whispering in her head, telling her that her soul would be dragged into an abyss she described as hell or the void. But what made these experiences even more terrifying was that they didn't just happen to Vicky. She received hundreds of calls from across America from children, adults, and the elderly, all describing the same phenomenon. One woman told Vicky she woke up with ligature marks on her wrists and ankles as if she'd been bound in her dream. A child spoke of a man in a hat standing by the bed staring with emotionless eyes. And an elderly man, who didn't believe in demons, described feeling his soul being pulled from his body as if something were trying to take it. The clues Nathaniel and Vicky gathered only deepened the mystery. For Nathaniel, the stench of decay was a clear sign that the entity in his room wasn't a hallucination. The male voice from the girl in the murder case, along with the torn carpet, suggested a ritual or a controlling force. The 2 heartbeats in the widow of Demona's body were a clue that defied conventional science, raising questions about whether entities could create life, or at least mimic it within a human body. For Vicky, the ligature marks on victims' bodies were proof that sleep paralysis wasn't just psychological. The voices in their heads, the feeling of their souls being threatened, and the uncanny consistency of descriptions from the 16th century to today suggested a pattern too precise to be random. An ancient document Vicky studied from Mesopotamian times described similar entities called incubus and succubus, which didn't just attack in dreams, but drank blood and drained life force. How could descriptions from thousands of years ago match so perfectly with what people experience today? These events lead us to some initial theories, each with its strengths and weaknesses. First, these could be traditional demons, as the Catholic Church describes fallen angels trying to possess humans. This fits cases like the murder and the widow of Demona, but it doesn't explain the ligature marks or alien-like entities. Second, they could be dybbuks, mutated spirits, trying to re-enter living bodies, as in the widow of Demona's case. But this doesn't account for the similarities with UFO phenomena. Third, they might be aliens in disguise, using technology to manipulate minds, as Nathaniel suggested, with demonic flights. But why would they appear in 16th century dreams? And finally, the boldest theory, a singular intelligence, neither demon nor alien, manipulating humanity across centuries. Nathaniel believes this intelligence knows how to exploit human fear. And I can't help but agree that there's something too calculated about how these entities operate, as if they're playing a game whose rules we'll never understand. These eerie clues, the stench, the voice, the 2 heartbeats, the ligature marks, led Nathaniel and Vicky to their investigations. But the answers they found only deepened the mystery. In the next part, we'll explore how they confronted these entities, the theories they developed, and the questions that made them wonder if humanity is being manipulated by a force far greater than we know. After the terrifying moments, Nathaniel Gillis and Vicky Joy faced from the pale girl in Nathaniel's bedroom to the shadowy figures haunting Vicky during sleep paralysis, both refused to simply survive. They chose to confront these mysterious entities head-on. The eerie clues like the stench of decay, the male voice echoing from a possessed girl, the two heartbeats in a woman's body, or the ligature marks appearing after dream drove them to dig deeper. Nathaniel became a demonologist, entering haunted homes to perform exorcisms, while Vicky spent decades counseling those trapped in supernatural nightmares. But their investigations were far from easy. They faced rejection from churches, skepticism from science, and sometimes even threats from the forces they sought to expose. In this part, we'll uncover how Nathaniel and Vicky pursued the truth, the theories they developed about the nature of these entities, and a bold reflection: could humanity be manipulated by an intelligence beyond our understanding? Let's return to Nathaniel Gillis, who transformed from an 8-year-old boy terrified in his bedroom to a supernatural researcher with 20 years of experience. His journey began in those horrifying nights, in the haunted house, where he not only saw the pale girl, but felt the entity's presence in every moment of his life. Nathaniel once said something that makes you pause. The entity went to bed with me. It woke up and went to school with me. At 8, he had no way to cope with the fear, but he developed a survival mechanism, asking himself if he was scared simply because he didn't understand what this entity was. That question not only helped him endure those years of torment, but became the driving force behind his lifelong quest for answers. As an adult, Nathaniel didn't choose to forget. He chose to face these phenomena head-on, even though the path was fraught with danger and isolation. Nathaniel wasn't trained in a prestigious university or a formal academy for demonology because such places don't exist. Instead, he learned through experience in haunted homes and with desperate people who sought his help. One of his first teachers was the Pentecostal movement, a religious community in America known for its fervent belief in spiritual warfare. They taught him about exorcism rituals and how to confront supernatural entities. But Nathaniel quickly realized his experiences didn't fit their template. When he spoke of the pale girl, the shadowy figures, and the swirling smoke, he was often dismissed, accused of exaggerating or even lying. This rigidity left Nathaniel feeling isolated, but it also pushed him to seek answers beyond the confines of traditional religion. For the first 10 years of his career, he performed exorcisms himself, entering homes where the air felt so heavy it was hard to breathe. One unforgettable case was the murder he investigated a house with a torn-up carpet and a girl speaking in a male voice that wasn't hers. Nathaniel didn't just pray. He tried to understand why this entity chose that girl and what the torn carpet signified in that horrifying event. Another case, even stranger, was the widow of Demona. Nathaniel didn't provide specifics on when or where this happened, but it might have occurred in a place like the Middle East, where belief in Dybbuk, Jewish spirits, is still strong. This woman, a devout Jew, was possessed by an entity that made her feel a heaviness in her body. When exorcists examined her, they found something unbelievable. She had 2 heartbeats, one hers, and another faint and irregular, as if something else was living inside her. Nathaniel believed this was a Dybbuk, but the case raised a bigger question. Was this entity trying to inhabit her body, or was it creating something new, like a supernatural fetus? After the exorcism, the entity left, and the fetus, if it existed, vanished without a trace. Nathaniel had no clear answers, but he began to suspect these phenomena were more complex than religion or science could explain. While Nathaniel investigated through real-world cases, Vicky Joy took a different but equally challenging path. With 40 years of enduring sleep paralysis, Vicky wasn't just a victim. She became a guide for others trapped in this phenomenon. She received hundreds of calls from across America, from children terrified of a man in a hat by their bed, to elderly people feeling their souls being pulled into an abyss. Vicky didn't just listen. She delved into research from ancient Mesopotamian texts to the Bible to understand these entities. She discovered that what we call sleep paralysis today was described thousands of years ago with entities like incubus and succubus that didn't just attack in dreams, but drained life force. A document from Damascus, which Vicky studied, described women visited by entities in dreams, waking with ligature marks on their bodies. This consistency across centuries and cultures convinced Vicky that this wasn't mere hallucination or neurological disorder. But Vicky's path was filled with obstacles. When she mentioned incubus and succubus in a Bible study class at university, she was ridiculed by her professor and peers as if she were insane. Religious leaders, from pastors to priests, often dismissed her and other victims' experiences, calling them hallucinations or sinful thoughts. Even doctors with diagnoses of sleep disorders or mental health issues couldn't explain the ligature marks or the feeling of a soul in peril. Vicky once said something haunting. The people going through this aren't crazy. They're intelligent, healthy, and looking for answers. But answers were elusive, and this isolation drove many victims to despair. Vicky became a rare beacon, someone willing to listen and help them face their fear. Their investigations led Nathaniel and Vicky to a range of theories about these entities, each opening new questions. Let's break down 5 main theories with their strengths and weaknesses to understand why this mystery remains unsolved. Traditional demonic possession description. These entities are demons or fallen angels, as described by the Catholic Church since the 16th century, aiming to possess humans or sow fear. Exorcisms, like in the widow of Demona's case, are designed to expel them. Strengths fits religious beliefs in cases like the murder where the girl spoke in a male voice. Exorcisms sometimes work, as with the widow of Demona. Weaknesses doesn't explain physical marks like ligature wounds or alien-like entities. Many cases like Nathaniel's don't fit the traditional demonic template. Unanswered questions. Why do these entities evolve forms from a pale girl to shadows? If they're demons, why manipulate through dreams instead of direct action? Dybbuk mutated spirits description. These are human spirits mutated after death, trying to re-enter living bodies as in Jewish tradition. The widow of Demona's case with 2 heartbeats is a prime example. Strengths. Explains cases involving supernatural pregnancy and ghostly apparitions like Nathaniel's pale girl. Jewish Dybbuk lore provides a clear framework. Weaknesses. Doesn't account for similarities with UFO phenomena like Nathaniel's demonic flights or alien-like entities in Vicky's cases. Unanswered questions. How do spirits mutate into conscious manipulative entities? Do they act independently or as part of a larger system? Aliens in disguise description. These entities are aliens using technology to pose as demons or spirits manipulating humans. Nathaniel mentioned technology and demonic flights, and some of Vicky's victims described alien-like entities. Strengths explains physical marks, like ligature wounds and alien-like appearances. Demonic flights resemble UFO abductions. Weaknesses. Lacks concrete evidence for aliens and conflicts with religious traditions. Why would aliens appear in 16th century dreams before UFOs were known? Unanswered questions. What's the alien's purpose? Why manipulate through dreams instead of direct technology? Singular, manipulative intelligence description. A single intelligence, neither demon nor alien, uses masks. Demons Dybbuk's aliens to hide its true nature, as Nathaniel suggests. It exploits human fear and manipulates minds. Strengths explains the consistency of phenomena across centuries and cultures from the 16th century to today. Cases like the murder, the widow of Demona, and sleep paralysis show a calculated pattern. Weaknesses too abstract and hard to prove. It's unclear where this intelligence comes from, another dimension, a collective mind, or its ultimate goal. Unanswered questions. Is this intelligence conscious or an automated system? Why does it target some people like Nathaniel and Vicky's psychological or neurological disorder description? These phenomena result from psychological issues like sleep paralysis or pineal gland activity, as Vicky suggested. Dreams and hallucinations may be triggered by stress drugs or sleep disorders. Strengths explain subjective experiences like Nathaniel's dreams and Vicky's paralysis. Some victims have histories of medication or mental health issues. Weaknesses doesn't explain physical marks like ligature wounds or two heartbeats or the consistency of descriptions across centuries. If hallucinations, why do thousands describe the same entities? Unanswered questions. Could a supernatural factor trigger these disorders? How do individual experiences share such similar patterns? Among these theories, Nathaniel and Vicky lean toward the idea of a singular intelligence behind it all. Nathaniel once said, "I believe there's a singular intelligence wearing different masks to hide its true nature." He pointed out that these entities, whether appearing as demons, Dybbuk, or aliens, share similar behaviors, manipulating dreams, inducing fear, and sometimes leaving physical marks. Vicky, with her research into ancient texts, noticed striking similarities between Mesopotamian descriptions and modern victims' reports. She believes these entities might be linked to the pineal gland, the window of the soul, but doesn't rule out a supernatural cause. Personally, I can't help but find the singular intelligence theory the most compelling. Think about it, if something knows how to pose as demons, ghosts, or aliens exploiting our deepest fears, it must have a greater purpose, one we're not equipped to understand. This makes me wonder, are we being manipulated without even realizing it, like pawns in a game we don't know we're playing? As Nathaniel and Vicky fought to uncover the truth, those around them, families, victims, and communities, grappled with their own pain and fear. In the next part, we'll explore how these phenomena affected their lives, the role of media in bringing these stories to light, and the questions that make us rethink the world we live in. After Nathaniel Gillis and Vicky Joy's relentless efforts to uncover the truth behind these supernatural entities, from exorcisms in haunted homes to desperate calls from sleep paralysis victims, the mystery remains unsolved. The eerie clues like the stench of decay, the male voice from a possessed girl, the two heartbeats in a woman's body, or the ligature marks after dreams, only deepen the question, what are we dealing with? But while Nathaniel and Vicky battled these invisible shadows, those around them, families, victims, and communities, faced the pain, isolation, and fear these phenomena left behind. In this part, we'll explore how these supernatural experiences change the lives of those involved, the role of media in bringing these stories to light, and the lasting impacts that make us question the world we live in. Let's start with Nathaniel Gillis, who as an 8-year-old boy faced the pale girl in his bedroom. For 8 years, from ages 8 to 16, Nathaniel lived in a prolonged nightmare, where the entity didn't just appear in the dark, but followed him everywhere. He once said something that chills the listener. The entity went to bed with me. It woke up and went to school with me. But what's heartbreaking is that his family, his parents who brought him to that haunted house, seemed unaware of what he was going through. The document doesn't detail their reactions, but this silence speaks volumes. Imagine being a child feeling a malevolent presence watching your every move. But when you try to tell your parents, they look at you with concern or say it's just your imagination. Nathaniel faced his fear alone, in a cold bedroom with walls that seemed to whisper secrets he couldn't understand. This isolation not only scarred him, but shaped who he became, a man determined to find the truth, even at the cost of his safety and acceptance. The pain of families wasn't limited to Nathaniel. In one horrifying case, he investigated a murder committed by a possessed teenage girl. The girl's family faced a nightmare no one could prepare for. Their home, with its torn-up carpet and an atmosphere so heavy it felt suffocating, became the scene of a crime beyond human understanding. When Nathaniel arrived, the family recounted how the girl with a blank face spoke in a deep male voice that echoed from her mouth without her lips moving. They were panicked, desperate, and didn't know what to do but call Nathaniel. Think about it. You're a parent watching your daughter, someone you raised and loved, turn into something not human. You hear a stranger's voice coming from her mouth, and you know whatever's controlling her isn't your child. Their pain wasn't just loss, but helplessness, realizing no doctor, priest, or prayer could instantly bring their daughter back. Nathaniel performed an exorcism, but the document doesn't say if the girl was saved. What's certain is that family will never forget what happened in that house. Meanwhile, Vicky Joy witnessed the pain of hundreds of victims who reached out to her in late-night calls. These people, from children to the elderly, shared a common thread. They felt isolated, dismissed, and trapped in a nightmare no one believed was real. One woman told Vicky she woke up with ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, as if bound in her dream. She went to a doctor who diagnosed a psychological disorder. She sought help from a church, only to be told she was imagining things or weighed down by sin. A child just 8 years old, the same age as Nathaniel, when he saw the pale girl, described a man in a hat, standing by the bed, staring with emotionless eyes. The child's parents didn't know what to do but hold their child and hope the nightmares would pass. And an elderly man, who didn't believe in demons, said he felt his soul being pulled from his body as if something were trying to take it. Vicky once said something haunting: "The people going through this aren't crazy. They're intelligent, healthy, and looking for answers." But answers were hard to come by, and the dismissal from churches, doctors, and even families drove these victims into a spiral of despair. The communities around Nathaniel and Vicky were also deeply affected, though not everyone was willing to admit it. In America, especially in small towns or religious communities, belief in demons, ghosts, and the supernatural remained strong. But this belief comes with a divide. Some see everything as scientifically explainable, while others view supernatural phenomena as signs of evil forces. Nathaniel, trained by the Pentecostal movement, was rejected when his experiences didn't fit their demonic possession template. He said if a phenomenon didn't align with their views, he was accused of lying or exaggerating. Vicky faced ridicule when she mentioned incubus and succubus in a university Bible study class, with her professor and peers treating her like a lunatic. This conflict created a barrier, leaving people like Nathaniel, Vicky, and their victims feeling like they were fighting alone. But in the darkness of this isolation, a glimmer of hope emerged. Small communities like the listeners of Coast to Coast AM, where Nathaniel and Vicky shared their stories. Coast to Coast, hosted by George Norrie, is a rare platform where supernatural stories are heard without judgment. Airing late at night across America, it's become a safe space for those feeling abandoned by society. When Nathaniel spoke of the pale girl or the murder case, or when Vicky shared about ligature marks and souls in peril, they weren't just talking to listeners. They were speaking to thousands silently enduring similar experiences. Coast to Coast AM plays a dual role. It gives victims a voice, but also amplifies fear of demonic possession and supernatural entities. Each episode is a reminder that the darkness isn't just darkness. It could be a doorway to a world no one wants to enter. But media has a downside. It can make some more skeptical, dismissing these stories as sensational or imaginary. Both Nathaniel and Vicky received threatening calls, not just from skeptics, but sometimes from those who felt threatened by what they were exposing. Nathaniel once mentioned his phone number isn't public yet. He got calls at 2 a.m. with threats that made him question his safety. The long-term impact of these phenomena goes beyond the personal pain of Nathaniel, Vicky, or their victims. They've changed how society views the supernatural, though progress is slow. Thanks to people like Vicky, sleep paralysis is now discussed more openly, no longer automatically labeled insanity or hallucination. Shows like Coast to Coast AM and Nathaniel's books like The Skin That Crawls and A Moment Called Man have encouraged victims to share their stories, creating a community of truth seekers. But the gap between science and religion persists like an unhealable rift. Doctors continue to diagnose sleep paralysis as a neurological issue, while churches only accept cases fitting their beliefs. As a result, many victims still feel trapped, unsure who to trust or where to turn. Vicky once received a call from a mother whose son sleepwalked and was found in the street at night, gripped by nightmares. The mother didn't know what to do but hold her son and pray, yet she felt her prayers weren't enough to banish whatever was haunting him. These phenomena also reinforce a deep societal fear. The fear of darkness, sleep, and loss of control. In America, where horror stories like The Exorcist or Amityville Horror are cultural staples, phenomena like demonic possession and sleep paralysis tap into primal human fears that something is lurking in the dark, waiting for our most vulnerable moments. Children and the elderly, the most vulnerable groups, are often targets, as Vicky pointed out. A child's story of a man in a hat might be dismissed, while an elderly person's experience might be blamed on dementia. The intelligence of these entities, if they're a conscious intelligence, lies in targeting those least likely to be believed, leaving them in isolation and fear. Culturally, these phenomena reflect a broader conflict in modern society between belief and skepticism, science and spirituality. Belief in demons, Dybbuk, or incubus succubus, stems from ancient religious traditions, Catholic, Jewish, Mesopotamian, but persists in the modern world, hidden beneath layers of doubt. Nathaniel and Vicky faced prejudice. Nathaniel rejected by Pentecostals, Vicky ridiculed at university, but they pressed on, knowing their experiences were real. Their persistence is a reminder that sometimes the truth lies where society refuses to look. And as we think about the impact of these phenomena, we can't help but wonder how many people out there right now are silently battling their own shadows with no one to believe them. With all the efforts, pain, and stories shared, the mystery of these entities remains unsolved, leading us to the final questions. In the next part, we'll sum up what we know and what we may never know about the mysterious world Nathaniel and Vicky have ventured into. After all the terrifying moments, eerie clues, and relentless efforts by Nathaniel Gillis and Vicky Joy to unravel the mystery of these supernatural entities, we're still standing before a veil of secrets that hasn't been lifted. From the pale girl in Nathaniel's bedroom, with the stench of decay, to the shadowy figures haunting Vicky in sleep paralysis. From the male voice echoing from a possessed girl in a murder case, to the two heartbeats in the widow of Damona's body. Each detail leads to a bigger question. What are we dealing with? Demons, ghosts, aliens, or an intelligence far beyond human understanding, wearing masks to manipulate us? While Nathaniel and Vicky fought for answers, the families, victims, and communities around them lived with the pain, isolation, and fear these phenomena left behind. In this final part, we'll sum up what we know and what we may never understand about this mysterious world, along with a reflection on what it means for all of us. And I want to hear from you. What do you think is hiding behind this curtain of darkness? Let's look back at the journey we've taken. Nathaniel Gillis, an 8.5-year-old boy, stepped into his new bedroom in an old house, perhaps in a small American town where the darkness felt heavier than usual. That first night, he faced a pale girl in a white linen dress with long black hair and cold eyes, accompanied by a stench like a rotting corpse. For 8 years, the entity didn't leave him, evolving from a girl to shadows, then to a swirling cloud of smoke, as if adapting to his fear. Recurring dreams of a man committing suicide with a syringe and a gunshot convinced Nathaniel the entity wasn't just threatening, but feeding on his terror. As an adult, Nathaniel became a demonologist, facing cases like a murder where a girl spoke in a white male voice, and the widow of Damona, who carried 2 heartbeats, as if an entity lived inside her. Vicky Joy, meanwhile, endured 40 years of sleep paralysis, where she and hundreds of others felt a weight on their chests, saw shadow figures, men in hats, or alien-like entities, and sometimes woke with ligature marks, These stories, separated by decades and thousands of miles, share a common thread, a sense that something is lurking, watching, and manipulating. But what makes these phenomena so terrifying isn't just what Nathaniel and Vicky experienced, it's how they affected those around them. Nathaniel's family, though barely mentioned, seemed to leave him to face the entity alone, in the isolation of an 8-year-old. The family in the murder case, watching their daughter controlled by a foreign voice, lived with pain and helplessness, unable to save her. The victims, who called Vicky from children to the elderly, felt dismissed by churches, doctors, and even families, as if their fear wasn't worth hearing. Coast to Coast AM, where Nathaniel and Vicky shared their stories, became a rare beacon, a place where those trapped in darkness could speak. But even this show couldn't bridge the gap between science and religion, skepticism and belief, leaving many victims behind. So what do we know about these entities? Nathaniel and Vicky offered several theories, each raising new questions. They could be traditional demons, as the Catholic Church describes fallen angels seeking possession. But this doesn't explain ligature marks or alien-like entities. They might be Dybbuk's mutated spirits trying to inhabit bodies, as in the widow of Demona's case. But this doesn't account for UFO-like phenomena. They could be aliens in disguise, using technology, as Nathaniel suggested, with demonic flights. But why appear in 16th century dreams? And the boldest theory, which both Nathaniel and Vicky leaned toward, a singular intelligence, neither demon nor alien, wearing masks to hide its true nature. This theory explains the uncanny consistency across centuries and cultures, but it raises the biggest question: what is this intelligence, and what does it want from us? These unanswered questions are what make this story so haunting. Did Nathaniel truly escape the entity that haunted him for 8 years? Or is it still watching from the shadows? Was the widow of Demona truly freed? Or is the thing that lived inside her waiting for another chance? Will Vicky's victims, with their ligature marks and voices in their heads, ever find peace? And most importantly, how many people out there right now are silently battling their own shadows with no one to believe them? The impact of these phenomena isn't just personal pain, but a reminder that the world we think we understand might be a small part of a larger picture, one we may never fully see. My personal reflection on this mystery is a mix of curiosity and unease. I can't help but find the singular intelligence theory the most compelling. Imagine a force that knows how to pose as demons, ghosts, or aliens, exploiting our deepest fears, possibly manipulating humanity for thousands of years. If this is true, we're not just victims, but pawns in a play we don't understand. But what troubles me most is the isolation of people like Nathaniel and Vicky. They've spent their lives fighting these entities, not just for themselves, but for thousands of others. Yet they've done so amid rejection and ridicule. What does this say about our society, so quick to dismiss what doesn't fit our beliefs? Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what these entities are, but why we as a species are so afraid to face the truth. Nathaniel and Vicky's story is a reminder that in the darkness of our bedrooms, in dreams, we can't control. There may be things waiting not to destroy us, but to challenge us. They chose to face their fear, and the question for us is, what would we do if one night we felt unseen eyes watching us? Perhaps the truth is still out there, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. And now I want to hear from you. What do you think about these phenomena? Are they demons, Dybbuks, aliens, or a singular intelligence manipulating us? Have you ever experienced something similar? A sleep paralysis episode, a strange dream, or a feeling of being watched? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Nathaniel and Vicky's story is part of a larger mystery, and I believe that by discussing and sharing, we can get closer to the truth. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and follow for more mysteries to explore together. Maybe somewhere in our stories, the truth is waiting to be uncovered.